All right, just a little bit of an off the cuff conversation. Let's chat about what it means to have a good lawyer or not have a good lawyer, or what the concept is even about um, of having a lawyer in court versus the advantage of sometimes not having somebody um, working for the bar for you in court.
Okay. And in this context, we'll primarily talk about divorce and family court, but this could also apply to criminal courts and even civil courts. But for
Pro-
now, for a
Probably.
MGTOW crowd, they mostly run into divorce and family, and I think that's what's going to be going through their minds is, okay, I'm listening, you know, in regards to this situation we all, as men, find ourselves in, the unfairness of the family courts.
And each of us has been.
Each of us has personally lived this hell. We are
Yeah.
both survivors of this nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, there is an advantage to having yourself a good lawyer. Um, if you were able to have yourself a good lawyer who was up against no lawyer at all or a very bad lawyer, um, or no lawyer at all, but also a person who had no idea about how to conduct themselves in what was going on, that'd be the ideal. The only time I've ever heard of that is when it's a woman who has the lawyer. Um, um, I've never heard of a man having a lawyer up against a woman who was representing herself and had no idea how to do so.
So, what are you saying the court does if the man has a very good lawyer and the woman doesn't have one or has a rookie lawyer?
Well, it's easy. They get her one and probably get him to pay for it.
So,
They get her one along the same lines as what he's got himself, probably. Don't you think?
so if you have the money to buy a $100,000 lawyer and she has the money to buy a $2,000 lawyer, you're basically going to be paying for two $50,000 lawyers.
That's the way I see it. Don't see any way around that, even.
Typical, typical. Okay.
All right.
What else?
Well, next up is the problem of facing. All right. So, what does it mean to put yourself behind a lawyer? Um, you're handing every decision to the way he's trained to handle it, and the the way that lawyers approach a problem has nothing to do with what's right and what's wrong. And that's the number one confusion I think that
Yeah.
people get into is they're like, well, that is just so wrong. How is that part of what's going on?
Yeah. Well, wait a minute. If I have $100,000 and I buy an awesome lawyer, aren't I supposed to go along with what he thinks best? He's the professional, right? We're supposed to get the judge on our side, kiss his butt a little bit, show we have the better case. The child's best interest is on this side of the aisle. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? That's what everybody does.
That's what some people try to do, I think. I don't know if I've ever heard of a lawyer. I don't know if I've ever heard of a court system kind of producing that on the way out. Um, there's a lot of very strict rules about how they have to maneuver themselves, and it doesn't it doesn't result in necessarily the best strategy being just putting your full faith into a lawyer and what he feels is the right way to go.
But Gary, I'm so stressed out. I damn near have PTSD over this. I've got facing my kids being torn away. Do you know how emotionally soothing and comforting it would be if I just put the responsibility of the very best, my interests being represented in the very best possible way, if I just pass that responsibility off to another human being that I'm paying a lot of money to? You're asking me to make sure that, to adopt an attitude that no one in this world is going to represent my best interest or ensure that my best interests are followed better than I can't just put that in good faith on the lawyer.
Well, clearly you can. You can do so. It may not be the best for you. And that's kind of where we're coming from in talking about that very topic. Is you can go through everything that there is to know about um, being 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 in this chair, and still decide that you have to put your faith in some lawyer. It can happen. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
But you still have I mean, if you're going to do the work, you need to do the work of understanding what's going on around you and why.
See, and obviously I believe in that 100%, but I think that a lot of new people to this right here will be a trip up to them because of what I mentioned, their hesitancy to like, I've got so much on my plate. I'm so stressed out. I'm going through a divorce. I'm facing child custody battle. The finances are hurting. My job might be in jeopardy. Like, reputation is crumbling. All this stuff's going on. And now you're telling me I can't pass that off to the lawyer. And that is what we're saying, to be clear. Not that it needs to be another source of stress to you. It's just to consider that your best interests, we need to consider that they may not be what the lawyer, even a well-paid lawyer, is going to follow. The lawyer's loyalty is to the system and to his paycheck.
Yeah.
You are client number 12 or 15 or 6 out of all the people he's representing on a weekly basis. And he's attorney number 1 to us. So it's just, hopefully the input here is to step outside of the individual perspective and zoom out, even though it's going to be uncomfortable, and consider that, maybe I need to do some homework and learn a bit here about the situation. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, you can go into buying a car in that situation and just walk into a dealership that looks nice and sit down at a car salesman and say, hey, give me what you feel's best for my situation. And you will walk out of there with a car, and it may even happen to be the best for your situation.
That is a outstanding analogy because I have sold cars at one point in the past. So I've seen this situation from the inside, but I know the magic behind the curtain. That is exactly what it is. It's like going in and trusting the salesperson to have your finances, to make sure you pick out the best value, the safest, the most reliable vehicle, instead of what's going to pay him the biggest commission and further the interest of the dealership in his career. That's exactly what it's like. You might get a really good salesman, but that is not the nature of being a salesperson. Salespeople are there because they don't like to go to work, but they want to make good money, and they do that from customers. That's the same thing with lawyers.
And being educated about the process can actually make it a lot less stressful.
Absolutely. I can personally testify to that a million ways from Sunday. I went from feeling like I might go nuts and do something dangerous to laughing. And the difference was having the knowledge, because it made me feel more powerful because I felt less afraid because they were less of a threat. That's the same thing in family court.
Well, that is, in fact, what got me obsessed about how courts work and how the mentality of judges and lawyers was that fear of lawyers. Some lawyers attacking me. First one would be the exes. Was the exes.
Yeah, so this is a great point. We're saying at first it might sound like, oh man, I'm taking on more stress by trying to learn some legal wisdom and big picture perspectives, learning some fluency in legalese. But in actuality, the more you learn about this, the less your stress level will be, and the more you'll be able to maintain your best interest according to you and your best strategy as opposed to the bar members. So yeah, that's a good point.
Well, I think back at how much time I spent trying to find resources for a broke, father
Yeah.
to get, get one of them good lawyers, to be able to afford one of them good lawyers. That's what everybody said. It's like, all you got to do is get yourself a good lawyer. That's your only obligation right now. Your only goal should be get a good lawyer, find a good lawyer.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, with what? I had no assets to speak of.
Yeah.
Nothing going on. Facing up against a lawyer that had been hired with, a good 10 times the amount of money I could come up with.
Yeah.
And
The vast majority of men are in that exact same situation. The
right,
vast majority.
right.
I mean, we can relate. My goodness.
But in retrospect, man, well, as it turned out, again, getting my feet into what was going on was a big help. And if I'd moved that timeline up and done that earlier, it would have saved me a lot of stress in the early days. And I guess that's what's what's the thinking is if I could just move my understanding earlier in that process, and just spent a couple days even just getting my head around what was about to go down and
Yeah.
what was going down, it would have been a tremendous help.
Yeah. The first week or two are the most powerful weeks because you absorb so much. Even if that's all you absorbed, you'd probably be 80, 90% of the way there. And the rest can be a lot of fine tuning because, we're in a quote unquote red pill community. But we're here to just introduce the concept that there's more than one red pill. I think there's about 4 or 5 main red pills in life. And this one about the legal system / government is definitely one of them. And being hip to that, you basically know everything. It's like being a lawyer and having gone to law school when it comes to comprehending what is actually going on. Like I said, the magic behind the curtain. Not buying into the illusion, not being intimidated by the whole news setting and all public speaking and all the scrutiny and the potential embarrassment and the loss of finances. Not being vulnerable to that pre-planned religion that they're subjecting you to against your will, without you consenting to any of this. It's having that perspective to recognize what is going on, and therefore you're making smarter decisions, saving money, because you're not making bad decisions, and a lot less stress. A lot less stress.
But what is the way that you can influence these courts except through a lawyer? That's the
So what is it that a lawyer provides? And because I believe, I've done it dozens and dozens of times and helped others in the hundreds do it, that your interests most definitely can, and I would say are best represented when you do it yourself. I know this is going to sound like a foreign concept. You're like, wait, what? What? Now, keep in mind, we're not suggesting that you actually go and do this. We don't know you, the listener. It may not be in your best interest to do this on your own. It takes a certain level of human being to be able to actually go into a courtroom and be effective. However, even if you do hire a lawyer, by the way, we don't criticize anybody who did, even though we don't believe in it. We don't judge anybody in this regard, obviously. Even if you did hire a lawyer, there's so much value in learning how to do this and learning all about this anyway. Your communications with that lawyer would be completely different, and he will treat you completely different and much better if he knows that you know. If he knows that he can't sell you like he sells his typical client, that you're aware of the hustle, you just don't want to personally get involved. It's like a car. It's like you going in to buy a car and you tell the salesperson, "Hey, look, I sold cars for 5 years, so let's cut the shit and just get right to the point. I know what's going on, and this is how it's going to go." And he'll have his input, and you have his input. So we're just saying this to the viewer here to just open up the spectrum, so we're not trying to paint you into a corner of do what we want you to do. That's all. We're just discussing it, the possibilities.
All right. So, how long do you think it takes an average person? All right. Let's say an average person who would be finding this video, which probably adds a little bit of ability. The average person finding this video in this situation, what do you think? What do you think he should invest for the first step, time-wise?
I think of the situation as if it were me in the past, and knowing what I know now. What would I want to invest, as you say, learn about first? It would be to have a discussion, to hear a discussion about what is actually going on. We call that the actual reality, behind all the woo-woo, and some talk about very basic, common core, easily understandable, something any 12-year-old could understand. Logic and ethics. Nothing complicated, nothing deep in the philosophy 404 class, just the basics. So that I could try and wrap my head around exactly what's going on, why it's going on the way it is, what their options, what the limitations of what they're going to tell you your options are and why, and what your actual options are and why. It would try to paint a big picture as concisely as possible, which is kind of a challenge.
It's funny you mentioned the limitations of them. We found, each of us, I think, that raising our own objections, just chiming in, sometimes limited them in ways that that otherwise that no one would have stopped them from doing what they were doing. Lawyers don't like stopping judges from doing something that's a bit of an overreach.
Yeah.
And I've known people certainly and done it where you're like, hey, that's a little bit unfair or a lot unfair.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, let's skip that idea and move on to this. It's a matter of knowing where they're heading and why. They just collect up all these little maneuvers and that put you in such a bad position that by the time you get to that point, there isn't any way to have a good outcome sometimes. And so
Yeah. The car analogy, it reminds me of that. That's like getting a lawyer is like having a car salesperson who must maintain a level of politeness and cordial relations with the manager in order to progress his career. And that's not the kind of salesperson you want. You want a salesperson that's going to go to bat for you. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, a salesperson who's working on a commission is going to be on the side of management. A salesperson who's working for a flat fee, no matter what car you buy, he's going to get, let's say, $500. That person's going to be on the side of the customer. So I'm just trying to point out the difference and why, if you think getting a lawyer, even a high-priced one, is the best strategy to take, understand you're hiring someone who must stay on a certain line, within a certain line of not pissing off the judge. If the judge is being arbitrary and unfair and, biased, like we all know they are for women these days, your lawyer's only going to be able to push so far back. And if you say, hey, that's not fair. Sorry, I had my, there we go. My screensaver started to kick in there. I wasn't active. We'll fix that. If you need to push back beyond the lawyer's line, the lawyer's going to advise you for some other reason, X, Y, and Z, why that's not a good idea. There's certain rules in place where lawyers can't say certain words and they can't challenge certain actions taken by judges. They just flat out can't. After all, they are bar members. That means they have sworn allegiance to this entity called the state bar. And we won't go into that. That is a whole other can of worms. But basically, they've sworn allegiance to a body of people who are most definitely not working for the betterment of humanity or society. I would call it antisocial and kind of psychotic scary.
Now, that allegiance can work against us in a way, though. I mean, well, in many ways, but in a way it can work against us, and all we have to do is point that out to get it reversed. It's on you. Sadly, it's on us to object to things that hurt us, even if it's our lawyer who's benefiting from it.
Yeah. And then also keep in mind that, let me just toss this out there. What's going on in court is going on in a foreign language. It's in English, all right, and you think you understand these words, but if you're not fluent in legalese, then a foreign language is going on without your awareness. That is an extremely dangerous, vulnerable position to be in, and that's part of what we're bringing to the table is fluency in legalese, and not just word by word, but tactic by tactic. What goes on, behind doors you don't have access to.
Now, just to be clear, we're not specialists in bar information. We're not bar trained.
Right.
We're not members.
Thank you.
We're not loyal to
No.
the bar. And we don't have the training that the bar has that focuses on their own rule sets.
Right.
We have a lot going on that talks about the problems with their rule sets, which is usually a big advantage.
If I need to know their rule sets with the internet, I can find that out. Like if there's a certain tactic I want to take, I don't know exactly the procedure, I can look that up. Like that's a problem with a relatively short solution timeline. It's the what you're talking about outside that takes a little bit of while to digest and consider.
Yeah, yeah. There's some roads that are outside of the bar, paved roads that get there much quicker sometimes.
Yeah.
So we're very anti-bar and anti-legal structures.
Well, why don't we sidebar super quick? What do you mean by legal? The average person watching this video is going to think legal means one thing. They're going to have a definition for it. You can look it up in Webster's.
Okay.
Now, that's one definition. In actual reality, is it different than Merriam-Webster's? To say something's legal, what does that imply?
Legal implies that has bar blessing.
Bar blessing.
Yeah.
Now, what if what is just? They claim to be a justice system. Let's just hypothetically say, what if what is so obviously, self-evidently just outside the bar member's opinion? But they still call it legal.
Yeah. I mean, again, legal trumps just.
Yes, that's my point.
Okay. So until you object, maybe. So if you make them choose between justice and legality,
Yeah.
overtly and decidedly, therefore, we've seen them be forced to choose what was just.
If there's enough pressure upon them to do
bingo.
so. Bingo. This brings us home.
There we are.
So, they'll typically choose what's legal. Screw justice. Just
Right.
to put a period on that thought.
Right.
Now, what is this pressure? When a judge wants to do one thing, but they cave and they have to do something else that you just don't expect the judge to do. Like we sometimes see it. Perfect example recently where the Supreme Court came out and said, oh my gosh, it's now 2019. You know what? That Eighth Amendment does mean something when it comes to excessive fines. And if you owe us a max penalty threat of $10,000, by golly, we shouldn't be able to steal your $42,000 Land Rover and confiscate it under asset forfeiture. Gee, I guess we've been wrong all this time. Now, obviously,
they didn't give anybody stuff back for the last 40 years or
Right.
anything, right?
For the last however many
well,
years.
except for that guy's Land Rover.
Except for
maybe.
that guy's Land Rover was the first. That's excessive fines. That's blatantly, obviously against the Eighth Amendment. They've been doing it all this time, and just now, the Supreme Court. This guy went to the Indiana Supreme Court. They turned him down. He had the money and time and effort to take it to the federal Supreme Court, and they go, "Oh, that Indiana Supreme Court was just dead wrong." Now, obviously, they made that very surprising decision against what all previous Supreme Courts have done. And the question here is, why? What is this pressure you're talking about? Where does it come from, and how can we have a conversation about this and learn more about this?
In that specific case, I'm not sure what all there was that's kind of bubbled up over the last couple of decades. I know that judges are conscious of what their bosses will think about how they're running their court, and if something comes up as being too obviously unjust, and the judge wasn't able to kind of contend with that problem, that looks bad for him. There's a social pressure from his boss. There's some pressure from the lawyer community. less so for ethics, but some. For instance, the asset forfeiture question. There are growing numbers of lawyers even that are starting to turn against that idea, and I think maybe that's what kind of hit a tipping point, and made them change the fundamental. No, they didn't change. If you're not charged with a crime, they still get to keep your crap.
Yeah.
This was a very narrow change, saying that if you are charged with a crime, that the crap they keep can't go in excess of what they're charging you with. So
The max penalty.
yeah. So I'm thinking it's like you actually want a charge that is minor, that has a minor maximum penalty, because then suddenly now it's only right to take
Right.
that amount. Whereas if they charged you with nothing, they can take anything they feel like, just about,
Right.
with very little you can do about it.
Now, keep in mind too that, and this is coming from Lysander Spooner, quote unquote excessive fines is not defined by their determination of your max penalty, your threat. Hey, you're committed this crime or misdemeanor or felony, and the max fine is $10,000. $10,000 does not equal a non-excessive fine. So what I'm saying is, the point I want to make is, excessive fine can very much depend on how much the person who's been accused, how much money they have. So if you don't even have $500 in the bank, and you get charged with a $10,000 fine over a nonviolent victimless crime, that is way excessive. But if you're a multimillionaire, that's a pittance. So it very much affects people's ability to defend themselves when one gets made near homeless and another one doesn't even feel it.
So the idea of excessive, if you have no objections, no one else will.
Right.
Probably not even your lawyer, unless you're really putting some pressure on him to make an argument. I can't imagine he wouldn't fight you to the point of asking to be dismissed from representing you on that point. If you said, listen, I'm broke, you're trying to take away a whole year's worth of my earnings potential, that's excessive for whatever. I can't imagine a lawyer making that, because that's rocking the boat that they live in.
Yeah, that's the stone foundation of their system.
And your interests and his interests are, boom, clashing.
Yeah.
And his interests are going to win on this. And he's going to sound like, well, there's just no way that we're not going to make those inroads and change the definition of excessive, and the excessive is just a settled law issue.
Yeah.
But if you're saying, listen, this is excessive. If you fear making this motion,
Yeah.
then I'm going to need to do it. But of course that collapses the whole representation down. Kind of gets into the question of, can you be represented? Because there's several points like that in any hearing, in any like legal proceeding. You're gonna come into questions where that little thing where his interests trump yours, that makes it go against you most of the time.
Yeah. And, keep in mind, in extreme circumstances, a judge can have you gagged, a judge can have you removed from the courtroom. And if you're being represented, sounds kind of schizophrenic to me, by the lawyer in the courtroom, everything he says, according to the court, is as if you said it.
Yeah.
So if he's not saying something that's in your best interest, guess what? You're being bound by what he says. And again, he is going to obey. He's not going to rock the boat to a certain degree. And very often, his future career prospects and growth are tied to the opinion of the judges that he's standing in front of.
Yeah. Attornment means fundamentally that you're putting your best interests in the hand of the court and trusting them to do what's right for you.
Well, they're all licensed by this entity known as the state of blank, fill in the state.
Yeah.
And that same state of blank is listed on all documentation as your accuser in criminal.
Well, that's in criminal. Yeah.
Criminal courts. And in divorce family courts, obviously, well, this could go into jurisdiction, but maybe we'll stay on the pressure issue.
So what's the other pressure? Back to what other pressures is the judge maybe not so consciously aware of, but just inherently aware of? The peanut gallery, the people at large. You know, it's come into play that YouTube's, YouTube streams and YouTube channels and YouTubes of people explaining the injustice that they've been experiencing seemed to have some effects on the rulings coming out. I mean, seemed strongly to have such effects. Now, family court is a rough place to be, and they are very insulated from any judgment. They're very insulated from any political pressure and social pressure, but there's still something there.
There is. I'm going to state some obvious, just basics here. So, if you're just standing alone, obviously you're not going to have as much power as if 100 people were in the courtroom supporting you directly, or 100,000 people were following you closely on YouTube. That's obvious. The ability to hold them accountable in ways that they haven't had to deal with and be held accountable before, the ability to expose them to transparency, to see what it is they're doing, is new to them as well. But further, the new point that I want to bring up here is that there's another reason why men dealing with family courts are further isolated, and that is because in human nature, men are wired to compete in a, gosh dang it, in a tournament style, a tournament mating strategy. We don't care about what happens to another guy nearly as much as maybe a woman would care about what happens to another woman. They're more socially wired. My point is that men are not wired to really give a shit about what's happening to another man, especially a stranger. It's like, hey, I got a life, I got things going on. We don't see it as, if that could happen to him, it could happen to me a lot of times. So it's working against us. It's something, we're always trying to kind of combat. And hopefully in the future, men will grow in a direction. I mean, the more painful it gets out there for more men, the quicker this is going to happen. It's just kind of the way the cookie crumbles. But that's the point I wanted to introduce, is just that we're kind of double screwed. So,
well, part of why we're bringing people together here in the MGTOW court arena is it creates hopefully some bonds and some public
exchange of ideas.
Yeah,
man, growth, options, red pill options. This is so badly needed. I don't want to distract from the pressure point here, but let me just introduce something that people who are listening are going to be familiar with really quickly. So bringing legal know-how and perspectives and options is so rare in the MGTOW community. The one that most people are going to be familiar with is from TFM's channel, where DDJ came in for a while, and as a former paralegal, gave a lot of knowledge and info about how to play the system from within the system's rules. And it was so new and just such a new thing, such a novel thing, but such a small amount of information. Even that small amount of information was just so shocking and so appealing and so interesting to so many people out there that obviously TFM made him a co-host of his show for many months. And he went on other shows and started a whole channel off of it and everything. What we're introducing is a better alternative to even what he introduced, because obviously he was playing from within their bounds, and we are talking about everything except playing within their bounds. So just trying to give a more perspective as to exactly where we're going. That's all I want to mention there.
Not everybody's going to know the acronym TFM.
Turd flinging monkey.
There you go.
Yeah, if you look up him on YouTube if you're not familiar.
Well, I thought one of the big no-nos was never to anger a judge. Now we're talking very much about angering judges.
Right. And his strategies would have agreed with that. When he went to court personally over 2 marriages and 2 sets of kids, he never advised angering the judge. His strategy was to get the information that you needed to embarrass your ex on the stand, so badly that the judge really had no option. And he was bolstered in that credibility wise because in his 2 divorces, he actually won primary custody in both of those. But as we all know, women have a huge advantage. And he didn't so much win as she so much lost it. Like it was hers to win, and she was just such a horrible person that she actually lost. So anyway, little sidebar there. But just to make it clear, we are not going to talk about any options or answers that he was talking about and he came up with. In fact, every time I listened to him, I was just kind of laughing and shaking my head, going, yeah, this is good if you're going to fight within the system, but there's so much better outside of their box and awareness and perspective. Even if you are going to operate from within their box, to have the knowledge outside the box will make you so much more effective and cause you so much more peace of mind when you do have to deal with all this.
But how does then something that potentially angers a judge benefit you? I mean, they can rule pretty much however they feel like ruling, right? And if you hack them off, they'll just flip that coin and make sure it comes up against you, right?
Mm-hmm. So the way to deal with that, if you want to bend a judge's will to yours, instead of you bending your will and your knee to him or her, you have got to be able to apply pressure. And as we refer this to, it's against someone as powerful as a judge, really. This is a public pressure, which therefore leads to a political pressure. Judges will bend to political will because ultimately it's the masses of the people who, if we rise up and get really angry about something they're doing, then, okay, we'll cave this time. Now, I'm talking about an individual circumstance with like one divorce court proceeding or one, divorce as a whole, but the concept remains the same. When you have to and choose to strategically anger a judge, it's not just because you're angry, because it requires supreme emotional control when you're actually doing this in a courtroom. It's because it's the wise, overall best strategy to employ based on applying this pressure. Now, he or she must be doing something really outside the lines, because when you're going to, anger a judge, you'd better be right. If you go for the king, you'd better be right. But that's what we're talking about here. And I know how ridiculous that may sound in the beginning. I know how, unbelievable that may sound. I know how that might sound like too good to be true, but, it is true. We've seen it, we've done it. And, that's what this video is about, is trying to explain. So we'll get into that more here. Because it takes a while. You can't fit all this on a Post-it note. So the pressure, we're talking about the pressure and angering a judge. How can that help you? What would you say?
Well, as much as the judge will act angry and maybe even be angry, he's going to have in mind, first and foremost, almost always, what decision benefits him most, or her. And his decision's not coming from how he feels about you as much as how he feels about, creating society he wants or she wants, and creating a world that he wants in the way he wants it, countered by the pressures that he's going to feel for deciding one way or another, and what he can justify, because it's not just a thumbs up, thumbs down. He's got to write a little bit about why and justifying why.
If
you can keep if you can keep him to that. So it really kind of revolves around, and they'll be furious in 1 second, and in the next second, chipper as all get out. So it's an act in a lot of sense, and in a lot of cases, it's an act. The anger and all that is meant to put you back in your place. Much like if you're raising a kid and you put on the dad voice, it's like, no, that's not really anger.
Yeah.
Usually, it's designed to get a reaction. It's designed to get a behavior. But it's a tough call sometimes to figure out whether someone's just off the rails
Yeah.
or they're just communicating that they want you to behave a certain way.
No, it's a great point, directly in line with what we're talking about with pressure. And so, pro tip number one: judges know that when they act angry, 99.999% of defendants will believe that they're sincerely angry. I was in the military briefly. One time I was like a fake drill instructor during a little preparation training thing for people who were about to go to boot camp. And so me and maybe a dozen other people were walking around like drill instructors yelling at people. I was like bellowing right in their face as loud as I could. They told me later how loud I was. Anyway, the point is that we were all just going to the next room and would just start smoking and joking. We were not angry at them in the slightest, but they all believed wholeheartedly that we were pissed because they were messing up or something. Now, it's just kind of a small, silly example, but I'm just introducing the idea that Gary's 100% right. They do know how to manipulate a situation through emotions, and if you're beating them in some areas, they've got a little toolkit of how to regain the advantage. And trying to sell the idea that they're super mad so that you will have an emotional reaction and start making mistakes, very much in their toolkit. So do not just automatically believe it when a judge gets angry. And furthermore, you'll get eventually to the point where if a judge gets angry, you're perfectly happy on the inside. That's more than fine with you because you're about to embarrass him on the transcript and in any public watching in the here and now in front of all of his lawyers and bailiffs around. How unprofessional it is, how unreasonable. Why would he possibly get angry? Do you need to take a recess? Did I say something wrong? You get just a great opportunity to show that you're, in the face of a judge's anger, a peaceful, reasonable, composed professional. And on the transcript and in public and any recordings that make it to the internet, that's very impressive, convincing. And that applies pressure, lets him know that tactic I just used doesn't work. He turned it around and spit it in my face, and I actually looked worse for losing my cool, even if it was an act. And if you're able to do, and this is just one way to deal with their many tactics, there's a way to deal with all their tactics, there's several ways to deal with each of their tactics. When you can send that message to a judge, you let him know that you're one of the very few who is not only confident enough, but capable enough to actually take him on in his courtroom, by his rule book, with his goons, with their guns in their jail cells. And they don't forget that, and it leaves a little impression on them, like, oh, crap. Now, they may fire 2 or 3 more attempts to manipulate you, but once you deflect them enough, that judge is going to find out, I had better stop trying to BS this guy. I can't win with the typical judicial tactics I'm trained to throw at him. That's a place where you want a judge. That's where the pressure starts to come in. Not only from you directly to that judge, but to people watching. This needs to get out. This recording needs to find a home on the internet so that people can comment on it, see it, and this judge can face public embarrassment. That's obviously another way to apply public pressure. I'm kind of going off here, but...
Well, to reel it back to the judge might just be angry because you took away one of his tools to find however he felt like finding later. He wants complete carte blanche to kind of create a world he wants at the end of things. And if you're limiting him down to finding in your favor, he's going to react. He's going to react.
Yeah. Yep.
All
so
right.
Is it kind of he's trying to put pressure on you right there.
Absolutely.
It's kind of a who can put pressure on who.
Yeah, and they'll try to make you feel foolish,
Yeah.
and they'll even if you have a lawyer, they'll try to back your lawyer down from certain points.
Oh yeah.
See it all the time.
They because they know it's not going to end up on the transcript. Judges, lawyers, and bailiffs all have, and court reporters all have little signals silent little bits of communication to let each other know what they desire. And I've seen it. Judges can send signals, just looks, at a prosecutor or the defendant's attorney, lawyer, whatever. My screen, I keep forgetting. To let them know, hey, be quiet. Hey, enough of that. Hey, I'm pissed. Hey, da 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 da. So again, more of this awareness is being hip to those things, always being aware to that silent communication that's going on. All about the pressure. All about the pressure. There's pressure everywhere. It's a pressure cooker.
Well, maybe in the future, one of the best ways to bring this kind of demonstrate is to chat with someone who's, um, well, getting someone in family court is going to be a little more rare, but maybe finding somebody who is trying to make their way and chatting with him about what's going on and how he can get his head around what's going on and some tactics to kind of deal with the strange things that are happening and the strange things that are being said.
Yeah.
And to get his mentality ahead of the game so that he understands what they're about to say rather than trying to make sense of what just went down. That's one of the biggest things is getting mentally ahead of the game, much like any like sport or anything like that, knowing what's about to happen instead of guessing.
I'm sure I could find someone like that.
Well, hopefully,
Get him in here
soon. Yeah.
Yeah. Because
All
that's
right.
a whole different video.
Well-
Someone sincerely uninformed and learning.
Well, even if he's not just starting, we'll catch somebody in some stage of this, because that's really the best way to lay it out. Us talking about what's hypothetically out there. We need to kind of. I feel it'd be nice to be able to describe a little bit more in real terms
Yeah.
what happens, what can happen, and what people have experienced.
Real world scenario. Yeah. Always more convincing.
All right, let's wrap this one up
Alrighty.
and
Move on to the next.
move on to the next.